this is a story. I'd say it's a meta story. It's what would happen if you collected a bunch of stories and then you extracted out a story from them. And it's sort of a story about destiny, and it's couched in a religious language, but that's okay, because most of these distilled stories form the foundation of religious texts, and myths and stories are, as I said, part of the outer perimeter of our society. They have a coherent nature, and they form a foundation, and it's on that foundation that everything that you take for granted rests, even if you don't understand the foundation. So I can give you an example. There's a metaphysical idea that underlies Western civilization, and that metaphysical idea is that the individual has transcendent worth. That's the idea from which the notion of natural rights is derived. And of course our legal system is predicated on the idea that you have certain natural rights. They're enshrined in the Bill of Rights, for example. And in the States, when the Bill of Rights was being formulated, when the original legislation that founded the state was being formulated, the formulators said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. What does that mean? They're axioms of faith, right? They're propositions, and there's no proof for them. They're a mode of operation in the world. And so the hypothesis is something like, well, if I treat you like there's something about you that has transcendent value, implicit, intrinsic value, whatever that might be, and there are stories about that, and we'll talk about that, and you do the same to me, and then we set up a body of laws that recognizes the sovereignty of the individual, so that the law itself has to act with respect towards every individual, even if that individual has done something reprehensible, which is very weird if you think about it, then our society will work better. And, well, perhaps that's true, but for better or worse, that is what this society is predicated on, and that's a very, 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 very old idea. And it's an idea that people came to with great difficulty, because it was over thousands of years that people learned how to take their little tribal groups, which were always squabbling with one another, right, because they're human beings, they're very violent, and tribal groups are by no means civilized. There's no noble savage like the Europeans thought. If you study tribal groups in the world today, the death rate by violence is unbelievably high. So something unites a tribe within a tribe, it's often kinship, but then tribes come together to form larger civilizations, and they have to determine some sort of meta principle that guides them so that they can cooperate and come together without destroying one another, and they have to extract out a principle by which the society might function, and that has to work. And then as societies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, they have to bring more and more of these diverse traditions together and extract out something from them that has power and functional utility and that allows people to unite. And so this is one of the stories that talks about that. It's a story about individual responsibility and what happens when it's not heeded. So, because we could say, you are a social creature, right to the core, and most of your environment is other people, and those other people want something from you, and you want something from them, so you're going to play games with them. You're either going to be good at it or you're going to be bad at it, but you're going to play games with them. And so the game might have rules, really sophisticated rules, in fact, and you'd expect that, because as your behavior more and more approximates an ideal, assuming such a thing exists, then you're more and more sophisticated, and the nature of the ideal is perhaps more and more complex and difficult to understand. You get a hint of this, though. You can get a hint of this because you will see, if you pay attention to your own soul, your psyche, your unconscious, you'll see that there are people that you admire and that there are people that you have contempt for, and that's And it isn't necessarily that you're 100% accurate in your judgment. You know, it's not such a bad idea to criticize your first impressions, but those states exist, and so there's a reason you admire someone, and there's a reason you have contempt for someone. There may be multiple reasons, and that's a hint to your intrinsic value structure. It's a hint about your intrinsic value structure, right? You wouldn't admire someone unless there was something about them that you valued, and perhaps that you would also like to be able to do, and you wouldn't despise someone or have contempt for them if you didn't feel that something they were doing was wrong, and that it would be wrong if you did it too. And so you're bringing to bear on the situation an implicit morality, and you have to do that because, as I said, you can't act without a morality, because if you're going to act, you're going to try to make things better. Otherwise, why bother? And if you're acting to make things better, then some things have to be better and some things have to be worse, and that's a value structure. So you have one.
Do you ever read the fine print that appears when you start browsing in incognito mode? It says that your activity might still be visible to your employer, your school, or your internet service provider. To really stop people from tracking your online activity, you need to do what I do and use ExpressVPN. Think about all the times you've used Wi-Fi at a coffee shop, the airport, or work. Without ExpressVPN, every site you visit could be logged by the admin of that network, which is still true even when you're in incognito mode. What's more, your home internet provider can also see and record your browsing data. In the US, they're legally allowed to sell that data to advertisers. ExpressVPN is an app that encrypts all of your network data and reroutes it through a network of secure servers, so your private online activity stays just that, private. ExpressVPN works on all your devices and it's super easy to use. The app literally has one button. You tap it to connect, and your browsing activity is secure from prying eyes. Stop letting strangers invade your online privacy. Protect yourself at expressvpn.com/JordanYT. Use Jordan's link at expressvpn.com/JordanYT to get 3 extra months free. That's expressvpn.com/JordanYT to learn more.
Alright, so Jonah, he gets a call from God, and God tells him that there's a city, Nineveh, that's falling into moral disarray. Now, what does that mean? Well, it's a universal story. It's like all cultures are always falling into disarray. It's their nature. Just entropy does that, right? Things change, the world changes, the environment changes, and the culture doesn't keep up very well, and then of course it has corrupt elements, and so it's an eternal story. The individual is always placed in relationship to a culture that's somewhat corrupt. And then the question is, well, what do you do about it? And if the answer is nothing, well then it'll just get more corrupt. And if the answer is be corrupt too, then it will just get more corrupt. So the answer has to be to oppose the corruption, because that's the only way it's going to stop. Now, God threatens to destroy this city because of its corruption, and I don't think you need to presume anything particularly metaphysical about that to understand it. It's very straightforward that the more corrupt a culture is and the less trust is possible between individuals, the less productive the culture is going to be, because why do anything if some corrupt person is just going to come and take it? You know, it might even be that the culture is so corrupt that if you are good for something and you produce resources, you're actually more likely to get killed because you have something of value. So like you're just not going anywhere with that. And why would you work if you didn't have any sense that, you know, you could store up the value of your work for some reasonable time in the future? So if the society is corrupt and there's no trust, it's degenerating. And you know, it might live for a while, but isn't going to last very long, and so that's the idea. Corrupt societies collapse. That leaves open what corruption means. Anyways, Jonah thinks, no, no bloody way. I'm not going to that city. They can go to hell as far as I'm concerned, and that's really what he thinks. And why in the world should I do anything about it anyways? And these are good objections. It's like, Why would you do that? And you'll face this, believe me, in your life. You will face this. In fact, you already do, always, constantly, continually, in small ways perhaps, when you're interacting with people who aren't treating you properly. And when you're acting, and those might be your parents, they might be your friends, they might be people at your workplace, they might be professors. They're playing a crooked game, and you don't like it. And you know it's crooked. And so then the question is, well, what should you do about it? Well, if you know it's crooked, it's not so good to play along with it. I mean, we'll say that you know it's crooked by your own standard of values. It degrades you to play along with it. You're going to stand up and oppose it? Well, no, probably not. You're probably going to do what Jonah did, jump on a ship and get the hell out of there. And, you know, that's a logical thing to do, but it doesn't solve the problem. And I think this has something to do with human ethical responsibility, because there are other old stories, and I'll tell you one likely, where the son of the king, the Lion King, the son of the king, he goes off and he's some pathetic adolescent, and then he's shamed by the reappearance of his old girlfriend into turning into something vaguely useful, and he opens his eyes and he goes back and he fights Scar, and you know, it's a scene of hell, right, because there's fire everywhere, and he fights Scar, he finds out Scar killed his father, he casts him into the pit, roughly speaking, and then the rain comes, and then, you know, the movie returns to its beginning, fundamentally. It's paradise, paradise lost, paradise regained. That's the movie. And I mean, that's the story of human beings, you know. You're in a place that's working out pretty well, something happens to knock you off your perch, you're down in the chaos for a good amount of time, and maybe you never get out. But maybe you learn something down there, maybe you strengthen your character, then you pop up to a new place, and maybe it's better. Better aim, better you.